Today we're going to talk about Gen 1 6R80 boosted application. How to go 10s, 9s, 8s. Now please bear with me, this video is going to be long. So I'll try my best to whittle down the combinations that I think are the most direct path on achieving your goal. There's many ways to skin a cat, but based on my experience, these have been the most efficient ways to get where you want to be. So because the 6R80 was introduced in 2011 on Mustangs, a lot of aftermarket manufacturers, parts people were really eager to get going on these vehicles. So power adders, once people found out how easily these things made power with a supercharger, whether it be a Whipple, TVS, or centrifugal, or turbos, turbo manufacturers started seeing that these things really respond extremely well. Once the octane is there, the race was on. The race was on who would be the first to 10s, 9s, and then 8s. Now, I can name some 7-second combinations, but for now, let's keep it at something reasonable in the pocketbook for budget purposes. Let's do 10s, 9s, and 8s. So when it comes to 10 seconds in a Coyote Mustang, you don't really need all that much, but about 10 pounds of boost, pump gas, and maybe a converter. Now, I'm assuming you have exhaust, I'm assuming you have suspension, I'm assuming you have stock 315 gears and an aluminum drive shaft. So I think to go 10s in any Gen 1 6R80 Coyote, 10 pounds of boost is all you need, or if you're a nitrous person, a 150 shot. A 150 shot and maybe a slightly looser converter will get you into the 10s quite easily. So let's start with centrifugals. Paxton 2200, Vortec V7, or a Vortec V3, any of those with a 3.6 pulley, a 3C or 4C converter, free-flowing exhaust. If you can cut a 1/6 60 foot, you have yourself a 10-second car if you're shifting at about 7,500 RPMs. So, Paxton, Vortec V3 or V7, even a Pro Charger, 10 PSI, you should be able to go 10.99 with a pretty loose converter, say a 4C, about 17 degrees of timing, 10 PSI. You can cut yourself a 1.6 60 foot time. This car is gonna run a 10, not a problem. Now, a lot of people are gonna go, why don't you just get a TVS and not get a converter? Well, let's talk about that. If you do not want to buy a torque converter, then you should not even look at turbos or centrifugals. In 100% of the applications, if you're going to go with a centrifugal or a turbocharger, whether it be a single on 3, CPR, twin on 3, fluid, or Hellion kits, you're going to need a aftermarket torque converter, because we need to spool the car up at the line. Trans brake, you're gonna need a trans brake or a loose enough converter that when you foot brake, you're able to make at least 5 pounds of boost leaving on a foot brake. But very rarely, if ever, do I see very well performing cars in the 10s turbo with just a converter and no trans brake. So the reason I mention centrifugals and turbos first is because you're gonna need an aftermarket torque converter. We'll talk about torque converters maybe on a later episode, but let's just say this. Rule of thumb is centrifugal or turbo, you absolutely need a converter to get into the 10s. Now, if you don't want to buy a torque converter, aftermarket torque converter, you can go with a VMP TVS, Roush supercharger. You can go with an Edelbrock eForce, anything with a twin vortice supercharger or a Whipple Gen 3 or Gen 5 supercharger. The reason I don't include the Gen 2 front feed is because it just isn't that efficient. If you want to grow, it'll get you into the 10s no problems, but I want to be able to set you up for growth later on. So I would avoid the Gen 2 2.9 front feed Whipple, and I would concentrate on the front feed Gen 5 3.0 and the TVS, whether it be a Gen 2R, a Gen 3, a Roush, or even an E-Force 2300 or 2600. Any of those, top mounted, positive displacement, twin screw or twin vortice superchargers should be able to get you into the 10s with pump gas, 17 degrees of timing, stock torque converter, and 315 gears. The reason I say that is Donnie's car. Donnie's car had a Gen 2R, stock converter, stock transmission, stock rear gears, and complete rear end, but he did have an aftermarket aluminum drive shaft. And that car was running 1070s, 1080s quite easily on pump gas in good weather. In the summer, that's a completely different story. So if you do not want to buy a torque converter and you want to save about $1,800, the supercharger you should be looking at is something that's twin screw or twin vortices, whether it be Edelbrock or a Whipple. Those are the ones you should be looking at if you have a 6R80 equipped Gen 1 Mustang. So now let's jump into the 9s. And again, I'm being very generic here, so I'm not going to be super specific with information. The 9s are getting to that point where you're going to need about 750 to 780, let's say high 700s. You need high 700s to be able to get the car at 3,800 pounds or so into the 9s. Can you do it with a stock Gen 1 motor? Yes. Do I recommend you doing it with a stock Gen 1 motor? Probably not. So if you want safety built in, you can get yourself a Gen 2 bottom end or a built bottom end or a Gen 3 bottom end. But let's just say that at 9s, you're gonna be making high 700s or mid to high 700s. So it's a good idea to fortify the bottom end. Now let's say the motor survives, whether it be a stock motor or a Gen 2 or Gen 3. What do we need to get a Gen 1 6R80 car into the 9s? So let's start with the centrifugal. A Paxton 2200 can make a good amount of power, especially at high RPMs. So you're gonna need a very loose converter because we wanna be able to leave with some decent amount of boost with a centrifugal because you're kind of lazy down low. But a Paxton needs about a 3.3 pulley to make high 700s, low 800s through a 6R80. So a 3.3 pulley on a 2200 Paxton head unit, in my opinion, is the way to go. Same goes for Vortec V3s now. V3s, you have to talk to Vortec, but they say that if you put a smaller pulley than a 3.6 on a V3 head unit, you might be overspinning the oil slinger and it might cause damage to the blower. So you can move over to a V7, which is lubricated by engine oil, not self-lubricated. So any centrifugal at about 15 pounds of boost should be able to carry a 3,800 pound car, Coyote, to the 9s. Now let's talk about fuel. 9s is somewhere where you don't want to play around with boosted pumps and race gas. In my opinion, if you want to live in the 9-second zone on a Gen 1 6R80 car, you absolutely have to buy a fuel system, and you should either be on race gas or ethanol, and I highly urge you to run ethanol. Again, 85% ethanol is the norm. I don't care how you get it or where you get it, as long as it's 85%, C85, ethanol 1R, ethanol S, anything that equals 85% ethanol is something you should highly consider if you want to make your car live in the 9-second zone. So let's go with a VMP Gen 2R or a Roush 2.3, any 2.3 liter TVS. You're going to need a 69 millimeter pulley or a 72 millimeter pulley and a 10% overdriven crank dampener. Now, why is that the case? Because a 69 millimeter pulley is pretty narrow, and it's pretty small. And unless you have a lot of belt wrap, you're going to experience potentially belt slip. So you're going to have to upgrade to an 8 rib or a 10 rib setup for a Gen 2 or Roush blower. If you want to have enough, let's say, belt wrap, or let's just say you don't want to have a small diameter pulley on the head unit, well, you make your crank pulley bigger, basically. Your damper has to be bigger diameter. So you can get a 10% or 15%, if I'm not mistaken, without doing too much to the front case to allow that to fit. So now you are severely overdriving your blower with a 72 millimeter pulley or a stock balancer with a 69 millimeter pulley, that should be high 700s, 750 and up through a 6R80 on E85 at about 21 degrees. That with a stock converter in good weather should get you into the low 10s, high 9s. Now, it is not a guarantee, but obviously you have to configure your vehicle to be able to make the quarter mile run efficiently, whether you got to pull weight, whether you got to if you want to loosen up the converter, you can, but a stock converter, 72 upper, 10% lower, or 69 upper, stock lower, should get you into the 9s on ethanol with a VMP Gen 2R. Now, we've already talked about the Paxton with a 3.3. We've talked about the TVS 2.3 with a 69 stock or 72 10%. You can get a Gen 3 head unit. A Gen 3 head unit, 2.6 liter VMP or E-Force. The VMP unit should see about a 2.8 or 3.0 pulley. Let's say a 2.8 pulley should make a ton of power on a 6R80 Gen 1 car, E85, and it should be able to propel you into the 9s quite easily. Now, a Gen 3 head unit, in my opinion, might need a converter. The 2.3 whips up a lot quicker because it's a smaller head unit. The 2.6 has a little softer down low, depending on if it's highly ported or not. But if it's a stock case, you might need a little help getting out of the hole. So if you're gonna go with 2.6 liter, it's a really good idea to get yourself an aftermarket converter. So now let's move over to Whipple stuff. Whipple stuff, you're gonna need a 3.0 pulley or 3.1 and smaller, and a torque converter, 4C, 3C, or a 252 non-lockup. And that should get you into the 9s quite easily. Now we're gonna start talking about turbo stuff. Now, because you absolutely need an aftermarket torque converter for any turbo application, on-3, 15 pounds or so, fluid, 15 pounds or so, anything turbo, you're gonna need similar boost in order to achieve that 9-second run. Whether at least 15 pounds of boost on any twin turbo setup should be plenty to get you into the 9s. Now the torque converter choice becomes a little confusing. You need something that's loose enough to be able to spool up with a trans brake and get out of the hole at about 5 pounds of boost or so. And then you have to decide how you want it to couple. Do you want it to couple hard? Do you want a lockup? Do you want a non-lockup? And that's something you should speak with Circle D and your tuner about. Rule of thumb is the 252 non-lockup is pretty darn legit, but that is more of a race-oriented converter where you probably can get away with a 2B stator situation on Circle D. I believe it's the 2B that I've had experience with fluid twin turbo kits that have been 880s, 870s, and 830s in Joey Basil's fluid twin turbo car that Power by the Hour built back in the day. But basically anything at 15 PSI should get you into the 9s, 3.3 pulley on a centrifugal, 69 stock or 72 10% on a 2.3, a Whipple. You should be into the 3.1 or 3.0 pulley sizes. Again, converters are probably a good idea, but on a 2.3 TVS is not necessary, but it'll only make it easier to get out of the hole with an aftermarket torque converter. Now, 8s. A big leap from 999 to 8.99. Huge leap. So I'm assuming you have a build motor or a Gen 2 bottom end that's studded, okay? Even at 9 seconds, the Gen 1 bottom end, it's screaming. It's ready to let go. I urge you to build it, get a Gen 3 bottom end or Gen 2 bottom end. You're gonna need at least 20 PSI. So whatever pulley combination you need to make 20 PSI, you're gonna have to do some research with the manufacturer. If you want to run a Paxton 2200, I personally have not seen any Paxton run 8s. Have I seen many of them run 930, 940, 920? Yes. But on a personal level, I have never seen any centrifugal that has a conventional mounting run 8s. Now, Pro Chargers probably screaming their butt off right now saying the F1, the F1, the F1. If you're a follower of this show, you know why I don't recommend Pro Charger stuff. But a Paxton I haven't really seen gone 8s, And I haven't really seen Vortex stuff gone 8s in a Coyote setup, in a Coyote car, Gen 1, 6R80. Maybe some have done it, but I haven't seen that many in the ticket system. How many VMP Gen 3 blowers, Edelbrock 2650 blowers, and Whipple 3.0 blowers have I seen run 8s? A ton. And how many twin turbo and single turbo cars have we seen run 8s? A ton. So let's concentrate on that. You're gonna need just volume. So I think you're taxing the 2.3 liter rotor case, so we'll leave that off to the side. And we'll do something like I did. On my red car, I had a 2650, 69 millimeter upper, 10% lower. This one never went 8s, but it went 9.1 at 153. So it's right there. In an S197, because you have a solid rear axle, the car is slightly lighter and it's easier to 60 foot than this car was, I highly suggest you do something similar. This car had a Kenny Bell 168 throttle body coupled to a 2650 VMP blower, E85 fuel system. It had an aftermarket torque converter, 3C, and it had 315 gears out back, and this one had a 4R200 hub, but with a 6R80 with all conventional gears, I think you can get into the 8s no problem. So let's say your S197 has a nice Gen 2 bottom end, VMP Gen 3, 69 upper, 10% lower, big cold air, big throttle body, E85 and a pretty loose converter. I think 8s are absolutely easy to achieve in an S197. And that's why I think the TVS is, in my opinion, an easier blower to go 8s in than anything else. Now, can you go 8s in with a Whipple supercharger? Absolutely. You're gonna need a 2.8 or 2.875 or 2.82. You're gonna need to make 20 plus PSI on any front feed Whipple. You're probably gonna need a 20% and let's say a 3.2 upper or a stock bottom and a very small diameter upper pulley on a Whipple, like a 3.0 or a 2.8, or a 20% crank and let's say a 3.125 upper should be well into the 20 PSI range. And same thing, pretty loose converter, 315 gears, 6R80, E85, big cold air. The throttle body on Whipples, in my opinion, is the best monoblade throttle body in the market. So if you want a reliable, repeatable car that just gets down the track all the time and doesn't fail safe with the throttle body, the Whipple supercharger is probably the one for you. It is literally the blower of choice of all Gen 3 guys that go to a turbo 400 trans. We'll talk about that on another video. Now, fluid twin turbo on 3s, Hellions, very easy, can get into the 8s, 20 PSI, choose your own boost controller, but again, the torque converter is gonna be where the sauce is. I highly recommend a 252 non-lockup on all turbo applications. If not, something like a 2B, or I'd rather you call Circle D and you can talk to them directly. So hopefully this gives you a very general idea as to how to go 10s, 9s, 8s in a 6R80 Gen 1 car. 10s are easily attainable with 10 PSI or 11 PSI on pump gas, stock motor, stock fuel pump, not a problem with a booster pump, maybe an octane booster here or there. 9s, you're getting into the high 700 zone, so you're gonna need to either beef up the bottom end or pray that your car doesn't explode on the stock bottom end. About 15 PSI. Centrifugals are in the 3.3 pulley range. TVS's 2.3s are gonna be in the 69 millimeter pulley range. 2.6s are gonna be in the 2.8 diameter range. So you're gonna have to get about 15 PSI to get into the 9s. And now if we wanna get into the 8s, now we're talking big boy stuff, 20 PSI, built motors, big mono blades, 69 upper, 10% lower on a 2.6, or an Edelbrock E-Force has like a 14% overdrive, and I had a 3.0 upper, so I had a 3.0 upper and a 14%, which whatever their stage 2 kit has, 8 rib, and my Fairmont at 3,500 pounds went 8.7 at 153, so I know that combo works really well. Whipples, again, If you have a big diameter lower, you can get away with maybe a 3.1 or 3.2 upper. If you don't have a big diameter lower, you're gonna have to really put a thimble on it and get it up to about 20 PSI. With turbos, of course, it's just a twist of the knob or a couple of pluses into the 20 PSI range, whether it be an on3, fluid twin turbo, Hellion, Aldo kit. Choose your favorite turbo builder. 20 PSI seems to be right exactly in its wheelhouse. And again, guys, this is a very generic, easy way of outlining what it takes to make a Gen 1 6R80 car go well into the 10s, 9s, 8s. We can talk about trans building, meaning what internal 6R80 parts are needed to achieve those numbers, but it's pretty, I don't want to say common sense, to need a built trans anything under 10 seconds. 9s, you might be able to get away with it stock trans, but we can talk trans stuff specifically on another video. But rest assured, anything quicker than a 1050, you're going to need a built trans, intermediate shaft, and maybe a billet forward planet to make sure that it doesn't explode like this one did, and I ended up turning it into a 4R200 hub. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll talk to you later.